Morning, Harry. Good luck for the day, and thank you very much. Hello, everybody.
Morning, Basil.
Morning. Hello, Basil.
Môre Jackie, môre Davie.
Morning.
Morning, Mr. Mayor. Are you going in preference of age? And I'm still coming. I'm last on the list.
No, you know, when you're old like me, I'm just slow. I'm trying to scroll through all the participants. Good morning, Basil.
How's it, Francois? You well?
I'm good, thanks.
Morning, Jackie.
Morning, Basil.
Morning all, it's Ray.
Good morning, all. I'm
Patrick.
All right.
Francois?
Good morning.
Steve here.
Good morning, Steve.
The guy that you stood up the other day in Cape Town.
Yeah.
I'm still suffering emotionally.
Yes, we're working so hard. You know, we don't have time for lunches. Don't take it personal.
You must change your priorities, Francois.
All work, no play makes Francois a dull boy, eh?
Next time we'll catch you.
Morning all, Stanya.
Morning, everybody. Nikus and Donesco here from Lowveld Bus Service.
Good morning.
Morning, Chablan Kumalo here from Gauteng Small Bus Operators Council.
Morning, everybody. We're just allowing more people into the meeting. There's a lot of people entering the meeting. We will with you in a few seconds. Good morning to all the good people. Great seeing all the faces. Thank you for joining in this meeting. Definitely going to be yet another very informative session. And we're very proud in having all of you on board. There's still lots of people entering the meeting. So as we speak, we're allowing them into the meeting. While we do that, let's just quickly do a little bit housekeeping while we've still got some time for that. You know, some of you might not be used to the Zoom platform yet. Just a quick orientation. You can see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat room where you can select the chat room, and then you can greet each other there, and you can post questions to the panelists there. And you can also, you know, send private messages to each other and so on. So the chat room is very convenient. We also use it during the questions and answers or the panel discussion sessions. And we see, you know, in a chat room whether you've posted the question there. But we also allow, during the questions and answers, we allow you to go to the participants box, and that's basically close to the chat room at the bottom of your screen. When you click on participants, you'll see, you can open up the participants box and see who's in the call. And you can see yourself, obviously, and you can mouse over your own name, and you can rename yourself if need be. Sometimes it's your device name displaying and not your name, so you can rename yourself. And then in that participants box, you can then raise your hand. There's an option, raise hand. And then we can recognize you during the panel discussion, that you can unmute yourself and ask a question. Talking about unmute, please keep yourselves on mute during the session. Otherwise, we've got too many background noises. I've got a challenge this morning myself. They mowing the lawn here outside the window, so bear with me when there's a little bit of noise. Yeah, and then keep an eye on your inbox. Should something go wrong, we will send you a link to rejoin the session should something happen to this event, just as a backup. Yeah, those following on YouTube, guys, you're also welcome to text questions to the panelists, the YouTube people, usually quite a number of people on YouTube as well. And then after this event, we will send you a feedback form, email you a feedback form that you can, well, it's a feedback link that you can kindly provide feedback to this event. It's extremely important to us to have your feedback, and we really appreciate that. And in that feedback form, you will also be given the opportunity to make suggestions and recommendations to the Transport Forum and topics maybe for future events and so on. We really need that. So thank you very much for that. We really appreciate that. All right, so the presentations you're going to see here today, those of them that will be made available to the public domain, we will upload that to the Transport Forum's website that you can download complimentary afterwards. I'll show you the link just now. I would like to put up the program for us, today's program. Let me just quickly get there. All right, there's today's program. And we're talking about shaping a new public transport subsidy regime policy. I'm not going to say too much because we've got learned people who's going to MC the event for us. It will be between Basil Govender, who's the Executive Manager for South African Bus Operators Association, our host, and also Rihanna Musaji, the founder of the Barefoot Facilitator, who's going to be the two MCs for today. We're very proud in having you on board, guys. Thank you very much for your kind support. And we're looking forward to having the session with you. Obviously the event is for free, complimentary, and all the related content on the web is for free. So there must be somebody paying for this. And the people paying for this are our valued sponsors. Some of them are gold sponsors. That's an annual agreement with the Transport Forum. And some of them do ad hoc sponsorships. If you're interested in getting exposure to the Transport Forum, you're welcome to contact myself, and I will tell you how you can get exposure through this very powerful platform. All right, so recognition to the sponsors then. We're proud having formal industry alliances with industry bodies, and these are South African Association of Freight Forwarders, South African Express Parcel Association, SABOA, South African Bus Operators Association, who's our host for today, the African Rail Industry Association, or ARIA, and the Chartered Institute for Logistics and Transport. They, in the start of this year, signed up with formal industry alliances with the Transport Forum. And obviously, Basil will just now tell us a little bit about SABOA. Is there perhaps somebody from SAF, South African Association of Freight Forwarders, who want to say a few words? They represent the clearing and forwarding industry. SAEPA is Express Logistics, representing the Express Logistics industry. ARIA, previously been known as the Railroad Association of South Africa. I don't know if there's somebody from ARIA who want to say a few words. And the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, focusing on training, education, and so on in our country. Anybody from SILSA? All right. We've got formal media partners with the Transport Forum, even though there are many media houses supporting the Transport Forum, giving us great exposure. Freight News, been part of the Transport Forum since the start of this Transport Forum more than 14 years ago. Don't know if there's somebody from Freight News today want to say a few words, perhaps. Letting me doing all the work again. Freight News. Freight News features are authoritative and insightful and are produced weekly, covering trade, transport, logistics, and related issues. Features are produced and described online in a PDF format the week they are released. At month-end, features are added to a printed compendium and distributed to importers, exporters, and their service providers. The distribution is similar to the previous distribution of Freight and Trading Weekly, all about logistics news, freight and logistics news. Railways Africa magazine is all about rail infrastructure. Philippa and her team have been involved many years with the Transport Forum. I can quickly read for you what they're saying about themselves. Just get the page. So Railways Africa is the African continent specialist trade technical business-to-business publication and online news service covering all aspects of the rail sector, with the current investment and future potential investment being made in rail and rail infrastructure projects. Railways Africa brings both global and local consultants, manufacturers, suppliers, and OEMs to the fore. Published weekly online and in print 6 times a year, Railways Africa is the authoritative publication in the rail industry in South Africa. Thank you, Railways Africa. University of Johannesburg. Don't know if there's somebody from UJ want to say a few words, perhaps Prof. Jackie Walters. Right, Prof. Jackie Walters, he's been involved with his team since the start of this Transport Forum, playing a big role in mentoring myself as well. I'm very thankful for them. They also have the Institute for Transport and Logistics Studies, which was created within the Department of Transport and Supply Chain Management at the University of Johannesburg in response to the industry's need for independent, unbiased, relevant, and up-to-date research. Thank you, Prof. Jackie and team, Prof. Naleen Pisa and them. They've been supporting me for many years. I see Prof. Jackie Walters coming into the meeting now again. Right, then we've got C-Track. Anybody from C-Track want to say a few words? C-Track's been also involved since the start of this Transport Forum. And it's all about making your assets visible. They say they assess their clients to transform their business with an innovative software as a solution, Internet of Things, and mobile solutions. They say we are passionate about changing the way business communicate, collaborate, and operate around the world, allowing you to take action on the insights from our cutting-edge devices and cloud platforms. Our support and hardware solutions come together in a clever, user-friendly, and powerful software systems enabling your business to always be visible. Very important that your business be visible, inventory assets being visible, very important. Then we see track. Global Trade Solution, anybody from Global Trade Solution? GTS, they've been a gold sponsor of the Transport Forum for about 3 years already now. They say that it's a user-friendly, cloud-based international trade and supply chain solution that incorporates the core requirements to manage all activities around international supply chain in a compliant and cost-effective manner. GTS offers seamless integration with the various entities in the international supply chain, including the statutory agencies such as customs authorities. Thank you, GTS. Louise Widget and that team. Zutari was going to say a few words about Zutari this morning. Zutari, previously known as Oricon as well. They say Zutari's broad collective of in-house industry recognized engineering consultants and trusted advisors provide seamless and integrated delivery. This unique ability to offer scaled engagement allows Zutari to solve complex challenges more effectively. Grounded in digital engineering, we continuously innovate to deliver better solutions. Zutari creates shared value and impact for our clients and the economies, environments, and communities we operate in. Thank you, Zutari, for your gold sponsorship. Bid Air Cargo. Just find Bid Air Cargo on my list here. Bid Air Cargo was established in 1996 as Express Air Services, whose fleet of freight aircraft operating overnight hub and spoke domestic network. Over the years, we've constantly evolved as a business, learned lessons, and have made numerous changes to our business model. Now, as Bid Air Cargo, we offer various African passenger airlines and air freight services agreement to manage their underutilized cargo capacity. The airline gains revenue for the cargo capacity which Bid Air Cargo manages and makes available to the express parcel industry. We have also developed other handling and marketing services for domestic and regional airlines. In 2014, Bid Air Cargo acquired the business of Imperial Air Cargo, which operates overnight freighter services in South Africa with a fleet of dedicated B737 freighter aircraft. Thank you, Bid Air Cargo. They joined the beginning of this year as a gold sponsor. Kuba. I was going to say a few words about Kuba. I am doing all the hard work this morning. At Kuba, we believe ticketing should be safe, simple, and secure. That's why we deliver ticket as a service. They say for too long, ticketing systems have been complex, inefficient, and expensive. Transport operators have spent years and millions installing, upgrading, and maintaining ineffective systems that passengers didn't understand. Well, no longer. Kuba's lean, efficient, and scalable platform provides a modern solution to a traditional problem. Our range of plug-and-play systems are deployed in a matter of weeks and seamlessly grow with operators' changing needs. With clients across the world and offices in London, Johannesburg, Rome, and Besançon, we are a truly global company with a truly global vision to banish the burden of ticketing. Thank you, Kuba. Such a great company. They've been with us already for about 7 years. Proud having them on board. Thank you, Kuba. Standard Bank.
Morning, Harry.
There we go. There we go. Good morning.
Good morning, Harry. It's Kathy. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We love this platform. I think it's an awesome opportunity to enable the current situation of not being face-to-face, yet not losing touch with our communities. And of course, Africa is our home for Standard Bank, and we truly appreciate being part of this particular platform and the forum. And we look forward to the rest of the day's presentations. And thank you again for the opportunity. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Kathy. Really appreciate your support as well. Kathy, you know, she's been also mentoring me for many years in many instances. Standard Bank's been an ad hoc sponsor of the Transport Forum for many years as well, and they proudly joined the Transport Forum as a gold sponsor in October last year. So thank you very much, Kathy, for your kind support. Right, Easy Clear. Somebody from Easy Clear. Easy Clear provides a software as a service to the freight forwarding, clearing, and logistics community in South Africa and neighboring BLNS countries. We strive to ensure service excellence through our expert team who understand the freight forwarding and customs clearing industry. We have also forged strong relationships with SARS, SAF, IATA, and TSPA to ensure that you, the client, are kept up to speed with industry development and changes. Easy Clear joined the Transport Forum at the beginning of this year as a gold sponsor. Thank you very much, Michael Hennen and team. Then we have JC Auditors. Is Oliver online to say a few words?
Yes, morning, Harry. I'll share some of the load with you.
Thank you.
And they say a picture paints 1,000 words. So with your permission, can I just share a few slides?
Please do.
Thanks, Harry. You have to let me in though.
Okay, sorry, I'll just stop share here. There we go.
Great, thank you. Okay, thanks, Harry. Yeah, so we again appreciate the platform to work with the Transport Forum, and we see great value in the discussions for all the stakeholders. So in terms of JC Auditors, we are an accredited certification body. Our certifications are recognized globally, and our goal is purely to add value to our client base. We want to provide simple professional certification services and enable our clients to achieve their business goals. Our certification is internationally recognized and accepted in terms of the IAF multilateral agreement. We're 100% Black-owned level 1 company. We're 100% South African owned, and we've got a team of auditors that pretty much cover all provinces and in quite a few neighboring African countries. And we are very focused on very bespoke, customer-focused solutions because every client is different from the next. And that's really quite a big part of our marketing drive. One of the main areas we provide certification for is RTMS, which is the Road Transport Management System, which essentially promotes safety, compliance, and efficiency in commercial fleets. And of course, SABOA are one of the big supporters and promoters of the RTMS. We also offer a number of ISO certification standards, and that's ISO 39001 for road traffic safety, 9,000 for quality management, 14,000 environmental, 45,000 for occupational health and safety, and we've just added on now ISO 22,000 for food safety management systems, and we've got that done. We also offer a number of training courses, and we do a fair amount of health and safety legal compliance audits in terms of compliance with the Act. We are also fortunate to be a partner with Engine, offering certification for their contractors. We do offer SQS, various supplier audits, and of course, verification assessments where clients specify a specific criteria and we conduct an assessment using the client's criteria. We're very privileged and feel, I think, blessed to be to have in our pool a number of the leading brands in the country, and we look forward to chatting to anyone who might need our services. And you're welcome to look at our website and drop us a mail. Thank you very much, Harry.
Thank you all, much appreciated. JC Auditors joined the Transport Forum as a gold sponsor at the beginning of this year. Thank you, Oliver, for that. Right, Ubunye She said to me this morning she's joining on YouTube because she's traveling and so on. So I'll do the work on her behalf of Bunyad. Joined the Transport Forum 2 years ago as a gold sponsor, and their focus is very much in interoperability and integration in the public transport space, especially to get the taxi industry recognized as a full mode of transport. So the Bunyad Capital, in the person of Wisele Majola and her team, are doing great work in this space. So thank you also for linking up the Transport Forum also with the taxi industry. We really appreciate your support. Huawei joined the beginning of this year as a gold sponsor. Don't know, Tommy Sneyman, perhaps you want to say a few words about Huawei?
Morning, Ernie. Thank you very much. I think everybody knows Huawei for the cell phones and for the routers that they normally procure from their contracts. But I think it's a little bit more than that. We focus as an international company on 4 areas, which is the cell phones, and then also on the carrier. We're the leader in the carrier business globally. And then we are looking at the cloud business. And then from enterprise business, that is where we focus on the transport sector. But I think everybody knows Huawei. I'm not going to waste your time on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. Much appreciated. Thank you for your support. Also, Tommy has also been mentoring me for many years, previously being the IT's director at the Kirilleni. So, Tommy, thank you very much. Guys, bear with me. They're mowing the lawn here at my window, so hopefully it's over soon. All right, so the Transport Forum's presentations will be uploaded to the website, that website. Very proud in this website being very popular. And what you need to do when you want to access these presentations is you go to that website, transportsig.com, and to the left of your screen, you will see there's a username and password that you should log in. Should you not have a login script yet, you can create your own login details by selecting sign up, and then that should give you access to a simple procedure to do the sign up and create your own complimentary account with the Transport Forum. Right, so once you've done that, you log into the website and you should see a menu similar to this, and then you can make use of the events feature and you go to downloads, and that's a little search engine. All right, so the search engine is very simple but powerful. It searches through 14 years worth of presentations done at the Transport Forum. You can type in at the title there, for example, a topic like logistics or public transport or whatever, and it will search through presentations, containing those words. Or you can type in a person's surname there, and it will give you all that person's presentations he presented over the past 14 years. Or you can go to category and you can select today's date, and it will bring up all today's presentations, and you can obviously download them. So that's all about our downloads feature, very powerful. Now take a picture of the screen. You can see there's a number of Olga Mashilu. She administers, we outsourced our business directly to Olga Mashilu and her company, Willem Montlake Consultant, and they administered me the business directory for us. Very popular. Companies are getting huge exposure through this. It's only 450 rands per year, and you can have your company listed in this popular business directory. All right, so that brings us back to our host for today, Mr. Basil Govender. And I'm now gladly handing over to Gavin to take over from me as our host for today. So Basil, thank you for your kind support, and you can now take the audience through the program and so forth. Thank you very much, Basil.
Thanks, Harry. Good morning, all. Welcome. Yeah, just bear with us before we get started with the formal program, as they say in the communication space, let's pay the rent first. So from a SABOA perspective, and together with the Transport Forum, we place on record our sincere thanks to the sponsors for today's event. That is Liability Underwriting Managers and Indwe Risk Services, both of whom are active in the risk and insurance space within the transport and logistics sectors. After approval from our ExCo, Sabah's entered into a long-term agreement with Liability, who is astutely led by Ms. Yolandi van Niekerk. This collaborative agreement also extends to a formal partnership with Indwe Risk Services. So they have both partnered with Sabah to develop and introduce to the market a holistic risk service offering, and that will be communicated in more detail in the near future. But representing both entities today are Yolandi van Niekerk of Liability and Steve Cornelius of Indwe. And I think we need to afford them a space to just tell you a little bit more about themselves and to introduce themselves. So welcome, and over to you, Yolandi.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Basil for introducing us, and Harry having us on this platform. It's absolutely a big honor for us. Over the past 7 years, I've worked very closely with SABOA and its members, and I've learned so much. My business is a specialist insurance agency, and we represent one of the biggest insurers in the country, MFRF, on behalf of Old Mutual, and we specialize in bus and coach insurance. In the process of giving policyholders sound advice, we rely on capable and professional brokers. And right next to me, I've got Steve Cornelius from Indwe Risk Services, who's a capable and professional broker. And together with SABOA and Indwe, I look forward to serve the bus and coach industry for many years to come.
Thank you, Yolandi. Thank you for the flattery. It'll get you everywhere. Basil, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the confidence in trusting Indwe to walk this road with you. Indwe is very proud to be involved with SABOA, the trusted mouthpiece of the bus industry in the country, and Yolandi and her company Liability, who is one of the largest specialist bus underwriters in South Africa. I just happened to realize that if we look at the three of us, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'll leave the audience to decide who fits in where. Just a little bit about Indwe. It's the country's largest insurance brokerage, locally owned insurance brokerage, providing risk and advisory services to our clients, to a broad spectrum of our clients, via a branch network of 18 branches. We also a level 2 BE contributor, which is becoming more and more important. Yolandi and I are very excited to pool our resources to provide what we hope will be a fresh approach to what has always been traditionally a grudge purchase. COVID has highlighted the importance of looking at risk and insurance in a different light, and specifically as far as saving costs are concerned. We also hope to look at and identify challenges to the industry where we will hope to play a role. Amongst those challenges is auto, which is a nightmare coming down the road quite quickly at us now. The age-old problem of passenger liability we'll be addressing. And just to give you a little bit of a hint, COVID has also highlighted the fact that buses aren't always on the road, and we're going to try and develop something exciting along the lines of a pay-as-you-drive, which will, at the end of the day, reduce and save costs, which is our purpose. I think Yolandi's got some more to say about what else we hope to achieve, so back to you, Yolandi.
Yes, I think we've got a deep empathy and understanding for the huge challenges that the bus and coach industry face at the moment. Everything from violence to road safety conditions and the economic impact on these operators. And it's very important because it's about their sustainability in the long run. And Ability is focused on risk management, we're definitely looking into alternative policy structuring and advanced systems and flexible insurance solutions to drive profitability so that these operators can make the most of their risk and their insurance solutions, thereby saving a little bit more, which contributes towards running efficient businesses. So Steve, will you elaborate on how we're going to do this?
Yeah, I think the important elements of what's going to drive our initiative is, first of all, understanding each business and its unique elements, and structuring a product and a service that is aligned and recognizes their individual focus on risk management. And when I say risk management, I mean driver behavior, managing and monitoring, controlling overloading, maintenance protocols, and many other management issues that put together will contribute to achieving what Yolandi has just mentioned. One of those elements, and you've heard a little bit about RTMS earlier from Oliver. I serve on the steering committee of the RTMS, or the RTMS steering committee, and I'm very passionate about it, and so is Yolandi, and I've got her to agree, and it wasn't difficult for her to recognize RTMS compliance or RTMS ready compliance and certification, and discount those operators that go that route, which will help to afford the whole process. It's also important to mention that we're not focusing on any particular type of bus operator, small, medium, large. We have solutions and are able to structure affordable products for all size fleets. And then just in conclusion, I'd like to say we're proudly an associate member of SABOA, and we look forward to the opportunity of working with you, Basil, to bring value-add benefits to your members and growing the SABOA membership book with you. And thank you for this opportunity. Being like in any marriage, if it must be successful, always let the woman have the last word. So over to you, Yolandi, to have the last word.
Well, you know, Steve, us women like to talk a lot, but we don't have a lot of time for that today. So I just want to invite any bus and coach operator out there who wants a fresh pair of eyes to analyze their risk and insurance to get into contact with us. You can either contact your existing broker, or you can contact very competent Steve Cornelius next to me. And we'll put his email address in the chat so that you can email him directly. And we thank you for listening to us, and we wish you a very...
Thank you very much. Thank you, Basil. Good luck.
Thank you, Basil. Thank you, Harry.
Thanks, Yolandi, Steve, once again for sponsoring the event. Fabulous backdrop that you're sitting at there. So you're literally and figuratively on board the bus. Well done.
100%. And I trust you'll be driving it successfully.
The most fun is on the bus.
Folks,
anyway,
thank you very much again. Yep. Now that the rent is officially paid and we're all in a secure environment, so let's get the show up and running. Head of the former program, just a bit about SABOA and a preamble on today's event from me, Basil Govender, the executive manager at SABOA. For those of you that don't know or unaware, SABOA is the industry association representing the bus and coach industry and its subsectors. It's been active for over 3 decades, comprising of principal members who are generally operators in different categories and associate members who are partner members to the association. The critical role SABOA has played and continues to play incorporates facilitating discourse and debate around policy, pretty much like today's event, and then assisting in collating and representing the industry's views on policy around public transport, specifically those that affect and or influence the framework within which the industry operates. So the industry broadly covers around 23% of daily mobility requirements, but it stands apart proudly due to its elevated adherence and proactive approach to safety and compliance standards. So coming closer to home on the discussion, there's been a period of at least 2 decades of protracted policy uncertainty within the public transport space. Through this period, rising costs for the provision of sustainable transport services, the emergence of a growing SMME sector, the rapid decline of PRASA, and the growth of the still to be regulated taxi industry that has grown to now the largest percentage provider of daily mobility, have all created a dire need for decisiveness with regards to integrated transport systems and services. The bus and coach industry has faced serious funding constraints with some legislative frameworks introduced since the introduction of DORA and the subsequent PTOG allocations being amended. These have directly impacted on investment and CapEx for bus replacement programs, innovation, development, and embracing new technology. So those challenges have been with us for a while. Coupled with that, pre-COVID, there's been a general downward trend or decline in ridership and usage of public transport on the bus sector side. The obvious impacts of COVID, I think, are there for all to see. We have a session, another webinar lined up later in the year to talk to a 1 year down the line COVID review, which shapes the direct impact and stats around that. But if you need to, just review the National Household Transport Survey or the Gauteng Household Transport Survey, and it talks to the general decline in public transport ridership. So overall, sustainable public transport in the bus and coach industry has become somewhat of a threadbare situation. It's survival versus progress. And I think today's event and today's discussion will help us weed out the issues and chart our way forward. Progress cannot be achieved, and it's almost near impossible without all the stakeholders understanding the challenges and working together. So it makes today's webinar a crucial discourse for the future. And with that in mind, SABOA has collaborated with the Transport Forum to host today's event to initiate the awareness and pick up on the energy and momentum created from the Future of Transport consultants' work and the NDOT. But I have to say, and I have to urge everybody to keep this front and center of all planning and consultations. We've extended the invitation to potentially all affected stakeholders. We've included labor, business, community, users, and we hope that they have seen fit to register and attend and represent their constituencies accordingly. So coming to the program, we've put together a program that includes panelists that will thread a scenario on the current economic outlook, then move to an overview of subsidy policy uncertainty that exists, and then finally move to the NDOT and the consultants from the Future of Transport for a team presentation on the proposed policy document for debate and comment. The industry broadly supports this initiative, so should we all, because change and development for a better and more sustainable integrated public transport system is what we strive for. Differences aside, we should work to the common purpose of ensuring that we make a contribution to this. So once again, thank you all for your attendance and participation. Remember to make use of the chat function to comment and or raise any queries and questions to the panelists, which will be handled at the interactive Q&A stage of the program. So to get us started this morning, our first panelist presenter is Mr. Mielani Maluleka. He's the Vice President of Research at ABSA. A bit about Mielani. Mielani is an economist with ABSA CIB's research division, where his primary focus is South African macroeconomics. He has been with the bank for about 8 years. Prior to this, He worked as a policy analyst at the National Treasury's Economic Policy Division. He has also worked for the Bureau for Economic Research at the University of Stellenbosch. His academic qualifications include a master's degree in economics from the University of Witwatersrand. Mielani will now present an economic overview incorporating scenario planning and research-based economic feedback. Thanks, Mielani, and welcome. Over to you.
Hi. Thank you very much, Basil. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear, and you can see my screen. Hopefully now.
Perfect. Thank you.
All good. Yeah.
Great. Thanks again, Basil, and a very good morning to everyone on this session across all of the different platforms from which you've joined. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts this morning. I think that many of us will agree that the last 14 months or so has been an incredibly difficult period as we've seen this pandemic cause what has been an unprecedented amount of disruption, not only to the economy at large, but I think also a little bit close to so many of us in our businesses, but also in our personal lives. There is a sense, of course, right now in which certain aspects of life have sort of gone back to normal, but I think it's clear that we're going to continue to navigate this environment of uncertainty for a protracted period. So as we continue to operate in this space that is characterized by this elevated level of uncertainty, what sort of macroeconomic environment are we going to be looking at, and where do we still have risks from that perspective? And that is what I would like to speak a little bit about this morning. And I want to focus on two broad sets of issues. And one, perhaps the most important as well, is economic growth, right? What has been the impact of this pandemic on the South African economy so far? What does the recovery look like, and what can we expect going forward? The second thing I also want to touch on a little bit is from a macro policy perspective, what is the policy space that exists for South Africa from a fiscal policy perspective or a monetary policy perspective to continue to support this recovery. Now, before I get to some of the sort of growth issues, I think in the context of the environment we find ourselves in, I would just like to start by making a few comments about the progression of this pandemic here in South Africa, because I think it's clear that this continues to be a big risk for the recovery going forward. And as you will see on the exhibit on the left-hand side of your screen, that we so far, at least since the virus arrived in South Africa, we have been hit by these two devastating waves of infections, which have, of course, sort of come and gone now. And it also did look for some time after the passing of the second wave, despite some warnings that we could see a third wave, that the figures looked fairly steady in terms of new infections. Those numbers were quite contained, and some people were starting to come out to say that maybe we could avoid a third wave. But it's also become clear that in these last few days, some of the developments have started to be a little bit worrying. And certainly when you look at the daily new cases, we've started to see a bit of a pickup again here in South Africa. If you look at the average for the last few days, we've gone a little bit above 2,000. The last time we were there was the middle of February. You look at the positive test ratio, it's also gone up a little bit after being steady at around 4%. Now, it's still a bit early to tell for sure whether we are in the early stages of a third wave, or if we are, how severe that third wave could be, and what the government's response is going to be in terms of lockdown restrictions. But I think it's clear that for South Africa, this pandemic will continue to be a challenge given how slow we have been in terms of the distribution of our vaccines here, even when compared to other countries within the continent, and I think if you look at the data as of yesterday, you see that South Africa is only vaccinated just about 400,000 healthcare workers. I mean, that's a pretty small proportion of the population. We have, I think, an estimated 1.3 million healthcare workers in South Africa. So we have not even covered half of that. Now, certainly one does not want to be too pessimistic about this. I think it's likely that the pace of rollout is going to pick up as we move to the second and third phase of the vaccine rollout. But the key point I want to highlight here is that the fact that we are so slow in our vaccination program leaves us with the risk not just of additional waves, but of also additional lockdown restrictions. And also some of the negative confidence effects that you tend to see in the economy, even when you don't have severe lockdown restrictions, as I will show you in a bit. And of course, in terms of the economic impact of this pandemic, we've already seen it was quite devastating last year. The official data that we've seen from Stats SA showed that last year we had a contraction of 7% in our GDP. We have not seen a contraction of that magnitude in South Africa since the 1920s. So it's a truly unprecedented amount of contraction in economic activity that we are looking at here. Now, recovery is certainly underway, but what we're also seeing here in our economic data is that this is a recovery that is actually proven to be very uneven. And one of the ways in which we sort of like to look at what is actually going on is in this chart here on the left-hand side. It's based on the Google mobility data in terms of how people are moving around, what sorts of things they're engaging with. And that chart I've plotted from February last year, and you can see how big the drop was last year when the hard lockdown restrictions were introduced, and of course some normalization as some of the lockdown restrictions were eased. But there's an interesting thing that comes out in this data set, and that is things are not recovering at an even pace, right? So we're seeing a lot more activity, interestingly enough, in places of economic activity such as retail, grocery and pharmacy stores. But when you look at things like movement back to workplaces, we're still way below where we were before the pandemic. And you see something similar as well in terms of movement to transit stations. Now, this could just look like sort of, I think, sort of high-level data, but I think it's got very real implications for businesses, and we've seen this in the hard economic data that we have access to here in South Africa. As you see in the two charts here on the right-hand side, the one at the top here, I've just plotted what we've seen in the manufacturing sector, mining sector, but the accommodation sector as well. And I think for me, something clear comes out here, and that is a lot of the recovery that we have seen so far has taken place on the production side of the economy. When you look at the services side of the economy, we continue to see very weak levels of activity. And even during before the second wave, you can see that in the accommodation space, for instance, income levels were still about 60% lower than where they were before the pandemic. And there's quite clearly a strong effect, a negative effect that has come through there as a result of the second wave. And this is this point that I was trying to speak to earlier, that it's not always the lockdown restrictions that weigh on economic activity, but sometimes the lack of confidence from domestic consumers, international consumers, to not engage is also quite critical. And this is why we need to be mindful of the risks that we continue to face from COVID-19. I think you can also see this sort of differentiated effect in the road transport sector, more specifically, which is data we get from Statistics South Africa. You can see what has happened in this chart here on the bottom right-hand side. This is data looking at road passenger journeys, road freight transportation, starting from last year. You can see how sharp the drop was in road passenger journeys and how slow the recovery has been, and how we have actually also seen a very strong negative effect during the second wave when we did not have particularly severe lockdown restrictions. So the progression of this pandemic certainly remains quite critical, and I think South Africa needs to do a little bit more in terms of distributing vaccine and I think rebuilding confidence. Now, outside of the risks that we obviously continue to face from COVID-19, I think there are also some fundamental issues in this economy that it's clear we will continue to deal with, that I think will also continue to affect the pace of the recovery going forward. And one of these challenges is what we're seeing on the consumer side. Now, the consumer is a key part of South Africa's GDP. I mean, if you look at our GDP from the expenditure side, 61% of our GDP is very directly household consumption expenditure. So when consumers are not spending, you certainly don't see much growth here. And we have already seen just how severe the impact has been in terms of job losses and how slow that recovery has been. If you look at the quarterly labor force survey, just as an example in this chart here on the left-hand side, you can remember that in the second quarter of last year, the South African economy lost about 2.2 million jobs. There was some recovery, but we're still far away from the jobs that we actually had before this pandemic. And if you compare, I mean, to the global financial crisis, which is of course a totally different kind of shock, you will remember that even though that recession was a lot smaller, and the jobs that we lost at that time were also not as severe as what we're going through right now, it took us 4 years here in South Africa to regain all of those jobs that we lost during the global financial crisis. And I think that right now, we're certainly looking at a shock that is much deeper, that is a lot more severe, that it could take a very long time indeed as well, I think, to recover most of the jobs that we have lost. And certainly when we look at some of the forward-looking surveys from the private sector, in terms of hiring intentions, it's quite clearly negative in the short term. So I think the pace of recovery going forward in household consumption expenditure in an environment where we still have this challenged labor market is unlikely to be particularly speedy in our view. Now, outside of the consumer, which is of course quite key for growth, one of the things that is also quite critical is obviously investment. And I think Basil also touched on this a little bit to say that, we've had 2 decades of high policy uncertainty. And you see that quite clearly when you look at the different surveys of business sentiment. One I'm showing here on the right-hand side, that business confidence has just been very low. You could pick any sector you want where there's some survey data, you find that confidence is just very, very low. And I think in that sort of environment, one of the things that we've seen, of course, last year is that there was this big contraction in private sector investment of about 20%. And right now, it just doesn't look like in the near term, I think we're going to be looking at a rapid pace of recovery in terms of investment. And that is, of course, one of the things that I think will continue to sort of affect South Africa's ability to recover going forward. But of course, one thing that doesn't help that story is Eskom, right? Because if you think back to last year was a year in which we had the lowest demand for electricity in a very long time. but it was also a year in which we had the most load shedding since 2015. And I think this just highlights how vulnerable the system is and just how much the risk of load shedding is for economic activity going forward, not just directly in terms of disruptions, but also in terms of us not being able to kind of generate the confidence that we need to be generating, I think, to get private sector investing, to get, I think, the kind of job growth that we need to be getting in South Africa. So in that sort of space, it becomes difficult, really, I think, to see a very strong pace of economic recovery here in South Africa. I mean, for our forecast is that we're going to see GDP growth of around 3.8% in South Africa this year after the contraction of 7.7% last year. But that is a significant underperformance when you compare to what is expected for the global economy, which is seen expanding at around 6% or so this year. And I think that is just a reflection of the ongoing challenges that some of which we really had before the COVID pandemic actually even arrived. But that is just a macro level forecast. I think it's important to stress that is going to look very different across the different sectors of the economy. And certainly, some of the sectors that we think will probably continue to have, I think, a challenging 2021. It is those sectors in the services side which require a relatively higher level of contact. And I think the way in which we're going about the slow pace of vaccination rollout here in South Africa certainly doesn't help. The parts of the economy that are likely, I think, to do relatively okay are those parts that are more outward oriented, that are linked a little bit more to the global growth cycle, and of course the strong commodity price story that we are seeing. But the underperformance that I think we're likely to continue to see on the services side means that, in our view, we think that we're looking at South Africa getting back to pre-pandemic levels of GDP only towards the end of 2022, and that is just a very slow pace of recovery that we think you should be expecting. Now, to just sort of move a little bit to the policy side of things, because I think when we going through such a sort of difficult economic period, there's typically, of course, an expectation that the government should come in to provide a little bit of policy support in the way of sort of expanded government consumption, investing in infrastructure, etc. Well, the truth of the matter is that South Africa just does not have the policy space to respond very much from a fiscal policy perspective. And you can see this constraint clearly when you look at this chart here that I have on the left-hand side. You can see just how much our public debt has risen even before the pandemic. I mean, from around sort of 26% of GDP before the global financial crisis, and right now to over 80%. And what has also grown with that is the debt service costs that the government has to pay on this debt, and that is just increasingly taking a larger and larger amount of public resources. So the space to I think come out with a strong sort of infrastructure response that is funded by the government, or sort of strong government consumption, is not as much as we've had in the past. And this is why we've seen the National Treasury coming out with a budget that I think made very clear that they're going to be exercising significant spending restraint over the coming years to try and rein in these deficits, and to also try and rein in some of this debt that we've accumulated over a very long time. So the government is in a tough position. The fiscal policy space is severely constrained, and we're certainly going to be seeing government, I think, making sort of harder and harder fiscal policy choices over the coming years. Another important area of policy, of course, I guess, macro side at least, I know that Professor Walters will touch a little bit on some of the uncertainties that we have from a regulatory perspective. But another key sort of macro policy support that we've had, which I think we will continue to have for some time, is monetary policy support. We, of course, did have the South African Reserve Bank cutting interest rates by 300 basis points last year. And the key question now for a lot of consumers, for a lot of businesses, is that are we going to see the interest rate cycle beginning to normalize very quickly? And we don't think so. We do think that the South African Reserve Bank has the policy space to keep monetary policy fairly accommodative for an extended period. And that is, despite some of these fuel price hikes that we have seen, the high electricity tariffs, when you look at overall headline inflation here in South Africa, it has remained quite contained, and it does look like it will be contained for quite some time. And I think in that sort of context, we think that low interest rate environment is something that I think we will be looking at for the remainder of this year. We only expect them to start gradual normalization of monetary policy only from next year. Of course, this should be supportive to some degree. Now, just to sort of conclude, Basil, and I'll touch a little bit on some of our forecasts here. And what are some of the things that we should be watching, I think, in the quarters ahead? One, which I think is quite key, is that we're still living in this pandemic, and I think the risks are there for South Africa. So we have to watch quite closely how the government moves in terms of the distribution of vaccines, because that is going to be absolutely critical for rebuilding confidence, particularly for re-engagement in some of the more sort of higher contact services parts of the economy. I think we also need to watch quite closely this issue around how much of the damage of this shock is going to prove to be permanent, how much is going to prove to be temporary. I think at this stage it's too early to tell, but we still have, I think, out there a lot of businesses that are under huge financial strain, and the risk that we could see some businesses folding and going down with jobs is certainly quite critical. So we have to watch quite closely how that unfolds. On the public finance side, I think it's a key issue. The government should be playing a much bigger role, I think, in terms of driving the recovery, particularly in terms of investing in infrastructure. But it's clear that the fiscal space for that is not really there. And we're hoping that if they can't use fiscal policy, at least they can use I think the sort of regulatory environment, I think, to sort of crowd in private sector investment. But I think there's some big unanswered questions on the public finance side that we need to continue to watch. And of course, also absolutely critical is structural reform. It's an issue that we've all been talking about here in South Africa, not since the start of this pandemic, but for decades. It's clear that I think there are some structural blockages to growth, to sort of supporting investment, and we're really hoping that we're going to see a little bit more in terms of that. But outside of that, look, it's important, I guess, to kind of remember that the South African economy was not growing very quickly before this pandemic. If you look at the 5 years before last year, our rate of growth per annum was just around 1.5%. And last year's contraction of 7% was a really big blow to an economy that was already in a very weak position. I think we should be expecting a recovery that fundamentally does look like it will be fairly muted because of some of these long-standing structural constraints that we've had here in South Africa. But because it's also an environment in which I think we still face elevated risks, I'd really like to emphasize that in your budgeting, in your planning, we need to account, I think, a little bit more than usual. I think sort of trying to think about upsides and downsides and where those could come from, because we still are in an environment in which I think we could get additional shocks to economic activity in ways in which we cannot sort of necessarily see right now. And with that, let me stop at this, Basil, and hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Mielani. Yeah, statistically depressing, if you want to call it, but I think a couple of key takeaways for everybody to digest. Our country being amongst the largest with the biggest hit from COVID. But I think from an industry perspective, folks, we need to be aware, and we are seeking an audience with the Minister of Transport, subject to a confirmation from him for availability. But key to talk to is that given in the last year of COVID, relief options have never translated broadly to the industry. We want to seek his audience in terms of picking up where we go forward. It has been all but non-existent in some sectors of the industry and not nearly enough in others, depending on who you talk to. And more importantly, I think with the COVID-19 vaccine rollout program and the way it's unfolding, I'm certainly elevating the agenda for the public transport worker, frontline worker, to be given some space in an elevated program, because that will contribute effectively towards minimizing the broader exposure levels and risks. But from the industry at large, if you have not already introduced a line item, picking up on Mielani's thoughts about budgeting, best you do, because I think we all need to be able to, at some point, quantify what the direct impact has been in terms of costs. And if you can introduce a line item into the accounting process, it will clearly stand out in terms of sharing statistics and costs thereof. But thank you very much, Mielani. Moving on with the program, Harry has started screen sharing. Next up, we have a seasoned academic who has been allied to SABOA and the industry at large for, again, well over 3 decades. But he still looks a sprightly young man in his photograph. Professor Jacobus Walters, also known as Jackie to many of his colleagues. Jackie Walters holds a doctoral degree in transport economics from the Rand Afrikaans University, RAU, and now the University of Johannesburg, UJ. His academic speciality includes public transport and aviation policy studies, as well as transport economics and logistics. He joined RAU in 1982, where he lectured under and postgraduate students in transport economics. He was the chairperson of the Department of Transport and Supply Chain Management for 18 years before he retired in 2018. He's the director of the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies, ITLS Africa, which is a research unit working in close collaboration with the University of Sydney. This unit focuses on a range of research topics in collaboration with departmental researchers and industry partners, as well as postgraduate research-based studies. Publication of the Journal of Transport and also Supply Chain Management, as well as information dissemination and specialist industry training programs. Jackie has been involved in numerous research products and research projects on a multimodal basis. He's also the author and co-author of a number of papers and publications. He's been a specialist advisor, as I said, to Southern Africa Bus Operators Association since 1989, and managed to travel extensively and study public transport systems and policies throughout the world. Jackie will present his views and the industry reflection on policy uncertainty, environment, and the related effects thereof. Welcome, Jackie. Morning.
Morning, Harry. Morning, Basil. Morning, Harry. Morning, colleagues. Yes, my presentation is about the uncertainty, and what I want to do is I want to before I carry on. I hope that's okay with you. Let me share the screen. me find the show quickly. I can't see it here for a second.
Harry and colleagues present whilst Jackie is getting lined up there. My apologies to the NDOT, Mr. Lesiba Manamela. I've incorrectly, Harry, we've got him listed with the incorrect designation and title. His title being Chief Director and not Director. Apologies to Mr. Manamela.
Apologies, we will fix that.
Right, is that, can everybody see that?
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Right, so I think, I think the industry is going through a very interesting phase, as we've also seen now. It's one of the worst hits of the based on COVID. And apart from that, there's also a lot of policy uncertainty. I think over the years we've been talking a lot about that as an industry. And I think what I want to do is just repeat some of those areas, some remarks about the uncertainty that the industry faces, and then maybe some comments on the first draft of the National Public Transport Subsidy Policy. Rihanna, I realize there may be some overlap with your talk, but when reading this proposed policy, there's also some further uncertainty in the years ahead as we see this. Then I'd also like to comment on the regulations relating to the Integrated Fare Systems Amendment regulations. There's not much information about that, but we are assuming that these two documents actually work together in some way or another, and I'll raise a few issues around that, and then some closing comments. So the scope of this presentation is really limited to the commuter bus services, and I'm not going to deal with the taxi and the rail industry, because this is really a bus forum and discussion that we have here today. So the industry itself, the commuter industry, is responsible for about 20% of all commuter trips in the country and operates around 8,000 buses in various parts of the country. Then we also have around 12,000 buses involved in scholar transport, mostly operated by SMMEs. So it's quite a large complement of buses that we have in the country that's responsible for commuter trips in total. The subsidized commuter services are all on contract based on the requirements of the white paper and subsequent transport legislation. And now we have interim tendered and negotiated contracts as far as those are concerned, of which the interim contracts are still by far the most in number. Around 68% of the subsidy budget is still spent on interim contracts that were concluded as long ago as 1997. It's difficult to think here that we are in 2021 and we still have contracts that date back to 1997 that's not been updated in any way or any manner. Whilst we're talking about new policies again, we haven't even implemented the previous policy completely. So the last public transport tendered contracts were awarded actually some 21 years ago. So we've had no movements. If you look at our compatriots in other developing countries and developed countries, we are falling way behind as far as this is concerned. In fact, I don't think there's any other country that's had this situation where we haven't had movement around this for the last 21 years. We have had some negotiated contracts in KZN, but not many. But then Gauteng put some service out at in the late 2018, but did not award the contracts. And operators there reported that there were major issues in the contract design, missing information, a lack of escalation formula. The other was dependent on the Division of Revenue Act escalation every year. And over a 7-year period, that's very difficult to tender if you don't know what the escalation is going to be. And this all probably led to higher price contracts and subsequently the unaffordability of these contracts for the authority itself. We've also had no expansion of commuter bus services funded via the Public Transport Operations Grant of the Division of Revenue Act. And this has been going on since 2001 and 2. And then people ask, why is the taxi industry growing its market share? It's growing its market share because this industry is not allowed to grow and to follow the market, so to speak, and new development, new settlements, and so on, as the kilometers are capped in all these contracts. The impact, therefore, of the Division of Revenue Act and the Conditional Grant Scheme linked to that has really been a slowly declining industry as overall kilometers are fixed on each contract in order to meet budget requirements, and annual escalations are not related to the cost of rendering the services. Subsidy did an exercise a few years ago, and we found that the underfunding over the period since the Division of Revenue Act has been in place to be in excess of 4 billion rand. Now that 4 billion rand bought a lot of new buses and upgraded the services to better specifications, better quality, and so on. New urban developments also cannot be served by the commuter bus operators, as additional kilometers are not allowed, allowing these areas to be serviced by taxi operators. And operators have been facing extensions of these contracts in the various conditions, such as month-to-month, 3-monthly, and lately 3-year extensions. So a lot of uncertainty built into this. One cannot expect companies to, recapitalize fleets extensively, new technology, and so on, when you don't know whether you'll have a contract in 2 or 3 years' time to service those loans. These circumstances are therefore not conducive to investments in the industry and not acceptable for new entrants, both operators as well as employees. So in our view, the industry is not playing its rightful role in public transport in South Africa, with the taxi industry being the only winner. And the latest household travel survey again showing that there's an increased market share for the taxi industry. In our view, government's done little to progress the situation over the last 21 years, because due to the lack of funding and sustainability of the funding, and also policy implementation. And this is not only at a national level, but it's also at the provincial and local sphere of government where we have this problem. So a review of the public transport subsidy policy has therefore been going on now for the last 2 years. We have been involved in 1 or 2 of these sessions pre-COVID. Hopefully, to better the current situation, in other words, to make some progress as far as implementation is concerned, and a new thinking, a new direction, and new initiatives to implement policy itself. But the major issue that we have, the draft policy, and this is based on the 2020 document, there may be newer documents out there, I'm not sure. This is the one we're working off that we were given to look at. So the big issue is that there's no systematic analysis so far that we've seen to determine the reasons why the current policy is not implemented. There's a lot of listing around the issues that we all know, but why were ITPs not developed, extensively developed so that one can tender and put contracts out? Why were contracts not issued? Why was lack of funding not addressed? Why don't we have transport authorities all over the country, but only one new one in Gauteng, recently established maybe a year ago, 6 months ago, and then maybe in Cape Town and eThekwini. And these questions must be answered in our view around the policy review going on. And so it's not only the subsidy side. Subsidy is integral to the overall policy. So one must look at the overall policy as well, not only the subsidy element of this policy, because it's at the heart of public transport. Certainly in this case, the PRASA services, the commuter bus services, as well as scholar services. So the issue, in our view, is the following. You have the National Department of Transport that defines public transport strategy and policy, and this is really in line with the white paper of 1996 and the revised white paper. And then the implementation side, really the provincial and local spheres of government through PREs, transport authorities, PRASA, etc. So that middle level is very important. Then you have the industry itself, public transport operations and operators that do the contracting and they respond to the overall policy strategy imperatives. In other words, the industry will respond to what government wants it to do. And for government to tell us what to do, it has to specify those in contracts, whether it's new buses, ages buses, kilometers, and so on. That is being specified by that middle level that you see there. But this is where the big problem resides as far as policy is concerned, public transport policy is concerned in this country. Since 1996, the white paper, there's lack of planning, coordinated planning, there's lack of implementation, there's lack of funding, there's lack of skills, lack of coordination of activities, i.e. land use and transport planning, also between and across metro areas, and complex interinstitutional arrangements. Now, I know the last one is from constitutional point of view, it's concurrent function, but it complicates this whole issue. And this is where the main issue is, where, if you look at where the arrow is pointing, this is where we have to start looking at how to solve the public transport impasse that we have in the country, the lack of quality of services that we have in the country, lack of implementation is lying here. Working with the national, obviously, but the operators themselves only respond to what's being done here at this level. And here is the main issue that we are facing in the country at this point in time. So what is this policy telling us around this? What will change? If we don't learn from our previous failures to implement and manage public transport policy, we cannot expect results when we amend our policies. Until we solve these issues, one cannot expect a different scenario going forward. So what needs to be done to correct this situation in the future? What and where are the proposals to address these issues in this document that we've read so far? And these are really core building blocks of successful public transport policy going forward. If we cannot solve these issues in a fundamental way, we'll continue to experience substandard public transport in the country. But the proposals also add another layer of uncertainty for the industry. If you look at some of the proposals being made in this draft document of 2020, it has, for instance, transport system benchmarks. Now, we also have benchmarks, and we also had benchmarks in the 1996 white paper. And I think the industry understands that benchmarks are looking forward. This is where we want to end up. But some of these benchmarks are, in our view, a bit unrealistic. For instance, a personnel cost benchmark of 25%. Currently, the labor cost, personnel cost in a typical bus company is between 35 and 45%. Maximum trip lengths of 40 kilometers. Some of our trips exceed 100 kilometers. System level maximum 50 grams CO2 per kilometer, which is a very low figure. Currently, it's 180 grams. Most motor cars, in fact, run at about 180 to 220, 240 grams CO2 per kilometer. And then also zero fatalities per 100,000 kilometers. Currently, we are at 26 fatalities per 100,000 kilometers. So these, for the subsidized services, have these hurdles to jump in order to get to the subsidy side. It's very unrealistic. And for the proposed CO2 levels, for instance, new green technology buses will be required. And I don't think the industry has a problem with that. Whatever the government specifies at once, it will respond to that, whether it's electric buses, hydrogen buses, whatever the case may be. But then one will also have to have in this policy issues addressed, such as what do you do with the phasing out of the existing diesel buses? How long do you have that phase out period? Of what period are we looking at this 50 grams CO2 per kilometer? So these are the things that if one thinks through the policy looking forward, that one will have to address. Then public transport subsidies will be based on approved transfer plans and managed by municipalities. Whilst this is acceptable, we've always accepted public transport plans and based at the municipal level and then contracting. But this hasn't happened over the last 25 years. And why should we now expect different results if we don't address the issues that gave rise to this problem for 25 years? Then subsidization of public transport with vested municipalities. We don't have a problem with that because it's also in the existing policy itself, but it's questionable whether municipalities at large throughout the country can manage this function, given the current level of mismanagement and lack of accountability. And if one looks at the amendment bill for National Land Transport Act, we also see there that provinces will remain responsible if municipalities cannot handle this function. But certainly one will have to look at this area, because if this is the intention, and this is what the Constitution tells us, public transport should be dealt with at the municipal level, local sphere of government. We have to deal with this issue. We cannot keep tap dancing around the issue if we want public transport to be managed at that level. Some of the reasons why municipalities have steered away from this function has also been the lack of dedicated funding and expertise in the sphere of government. Then municipalities will apply for public transport funding from national and provincial treasuries in line with the transport plans. Municipalities will also be required to supplement national and provincial appropriations from their own financial resources. Now, most provinces at this point in time have not supplemented the PTOG. And I think it's one or two provinces that have done this. Most have not done that. Gauteng has not done that, for instance. And it breeds poverty. What will move the municipalities to do this at the end of the day? So most plead poverty, and given the dire financial circumstances, it's doubtful if this will ever realize. So one could put that in a policy, but we don't address the reasons why it's not happening currently. What will change going forward to force provinces and local authorities to contribute towards a PTOG? And this is one of the reasons why there's such a shortfall. National Treasury recognizes the escalation clauses within these contracts, but it does not, when they determine the annual grant, does not take that into account. It's viewed that provinces should pick up that difference between the escalation clause and what National Treasury makes provision for in the PTOG. And this now continues that situation, and that we'll have a continued underfunding of the industry based on this recommendation as well. So then another point, when the subsidized public transport network transcends municipal boundaries, principle of cooperation across boundaries will apply. Relevant municipalities may jointly assign the management of subsidies, hopefully not only subsidies, but also the management of public transport to a heuristic entity. Now, this is already in our existing legislation. Why has it not happened? Why has it taken Gauteng, for instance, so many years to get this transport authority going? And what can we do in terms of this legislation to force this, if this is where we want to go? And there appears to be a lot of resistance towards the introduction of transport authorities amongst politicians at the local sphere of government as well as the provincial sphere of government. Then just the comment, public transport will be cost recovery based and not provided free of charge. One has to remember that contracted school bus services with provinces and education departments are currently free of charge to scholars. So I'm not sure how we're going to force scholars to start paying for services that has been offered free for many years now, based on the decision of government a few years ago. Then subsidy will comprise a user-targeted operational component and capital subsidy component, with user targeting limits limited to households earning below the upper bound poverty line as determined by the state. This is a very strong statement. There's too little detail to discuss this user-targeted subsidy proposal. We would like to see much more detail about this proposal as well as international best practice examples. In addition, cost-benefit studies, affordability studies, and the total cost of the fiscus needs to be determined. This is a radical departure from where we are now, as well as what the common practice is internationally around funding public transport services, bus services, rail services, and so on. Then also persons earning 1,183 rand per month should not be spending more than 10% of their revenue or income on transport for work, education, basic health services. Although we have this guideline at this point in time, one wonders whether any costing has been done to determine the actual cost to the state. This is implemented across all modes of transport. We know from the household travel survey results, the latest one as well as previous ones that were undertaken, that many people spend much more than this. It will cost the fiscus much more money to achieve this specific objective, especially if one implements also a type of funding scheme in the taxi industry. Then a very interesting comment, draft policy, all infrastructure and vehicles operating in the subsidized network will be owned by the state and managed through an appropriate contract. This requires a detailed discussion as it amounts to nationalization of public transport, which is not in line with the 1996 white paper objectives, which actually promoted private sector provision of services on behalf of the state, contracted to the state. And as far as we know, was not in the new draft white paper. It also appears to support management contracts to manage bus fleets. And the question is then also, does this also apply to the taxi industry that will apparently benefit from operational user-targeted subsidies or an extended capital subsidy, excuse me, as has been proposed in this document itself. But this is certainly a major departure from current practice in the country, as well as international practice. Then on financing, it also states there will be no differentiation of public transport modes. Much more detail is also needed about this far-reaching recommendation. Operating costs differ between modes of transport, as well as levels of formalization and concomitant requirements. Informal public transport systems, for transport systems. You know, if you look at minimum wages, hours of work, cost of equipment, the fact that informal transport does not have the cost of depots and things like that. There's a huge cost difference between the two industries, but here it says there's no differentiation between transport modes. Maybe it's the way it's been written, and maybe we'll hear a bit more about this in the next session. Then no municipality should be a public transport operator. However, the municipality may own public transport infrastructure and associated systems and competitively contract external entities to operate services. The experience, just a quick comment here, the experience of the management contract between eThekwini and Transnet in Durban, where litigation has been ongoing for many years, does not bode well for this form of contracting. At issue in this specific case are disputes about bus availability, bus replacement programs, maintenance issues, maintenance rates, labor issues, rates per kilometer, etc. And I can carry on like this. Basically, every condition in the current contract appears to be under dispute. This comes back to the fact that it's very important that any type of contract is well designed and clear, and that there's a form of trust between the operator and the authority in the work that's being done. But this certainly has been going on for many years in the courts, and we haven't seen the end of this as yet. But certainly, if this is the case, with the recommendations that the municipality should not operate its own municipal bus service, it points towards management contracts of such services. Then, just in closing on this part, it's noted that the proposal proposes additional capital subsidy funding for minibus taxi operators through increased budget for the scrapping allowance via the TRP on an application basis. And then also potential technology solutions will be evaluated to introduce a cashless and automatic fare collection system for the minibus taxi industry. And this will be part of the next part of my presentation. And also, it's also noted that the preparation of competitive procurement process for the prevailing bus contracts to stabilize and improve services. So this we agree with. The sooner this can happen, the better, so that we can actually move forward as far as the implementation of these service contracts are concerned. So the next part, very quickly, on the integrated fare systems amendment regulations. It's also just superficial comments. There's not much documentation around this, but it warrants a detailed discussion. I think we have a session set up for Friday with the Department of Transport to discuss this. But the DOT has published new and amended regulations regarding implementation of integrated fare systems. It makes provision for account-based ticketing systems developed by Sunroll in cooperation with the DOT. And these account-based ticketing systems will allow for nationally standardized fare collection and payment system across public transport modes. Travel cards will be sold by accredited outlets anywhere in the country, and the user can charge this card through an EFT, debit orders, and so on, and they can use that on any public transport mode of transport. So you can really see the linkage between the user side subsidy proposal in the subsidy policy proposals and this document. Public transport operators will also be compensated by the transaction clearinghouse in Sunroll, and the passenger's fare will then be calculated when the smart card is tapped against the module house in the vehicle, which is called a validator, and a fair amount deducted from the card at the time of travel. The operator then submits these transactions to Sunroll's back office at the clearinghouse, whereupon Sunroll will then debit the commuter's mobility account and reimburses the operator for the particular trips. I think many of us that have traveled internationally recognize this type of system, but there's a huge system behind the ticket or the smart card that you tap on these modules. So there's not much detail to comment on, as a supporting discussion document is not available, and hopefully we'll see something around this. So therefore, our comments around this is restricted to a number of questions as follows. How do these proposed amendments link up with and support the proposed new subsidy policy? And what are the time horizons we're looking at as far as this is concerned? There's reference to a national fare policy. What does this mean? What is envisaged, especially if one looks at the contracts in the bus industry and maybe concessioning and so on? It appears as participation system is voluntary at present, but all legacy automatic fare collection systems need to be compatible to the proposed system within 3 years. What does this mean? Why is this necessary? Is the presentation of the proposed system in the presentation, the proposed system mentions made of benefits of a homegrown system via SANROL. But what are the drawbacks? Certainly there must be some drawbacks around the homegrown system. It's not only the funding benefit that we have here. Also, there are many internationally developed systems that manage tens of millions of transactions on a daily basis throughout the world. Were these considered before the development of the SANROL-based system? And you know, if you look at the SANROL system, it appears to be only a clearinghouse. What happens to all the other support services that one would normally associate with such integrated fare management systems and big systems like in London, Paris, New York, Sydney, and so on? And how will the proposed national system impact current commuter bus contracting arrangements? And what changes need to be made to these contracts to accommodate the proposed system? So one can have these automatic fare collection systems ended, but how does it affect your contract? What will the cost be to the operator to convert existing fare collection systems to become compatible with the proposed system? And what additional equipment needs to be sourced to make use of the system, and what will the cost be? And how will the system compensate the operator for various trip lengths, time of day, day of the week, etc., as there's no standard fixed fare within any current operator. In fact, some operators have different fare systems within their own operations. So here we're talking intermodal buses, taxis, and trains. So a long way to go as far as this is concerned. And I think a lot of discussions must take place around this. Then just a question, how soon will the operator be reimbursed by the transaction clearinghouse of SANROL? You know, we've had issues around that before. There's also a lack of detailed explanatory memorandum on how the systems envisages to work in the different industries, how compatible it will be with existing practices, and generally a lack of consultation on the proposed system. So, Mr. Chairman, just in conclusion, it's evident that DOT is moving in the new and as yet untested direction of public transport in the country. Movement is welcome because we haven't had movement for a long time. As there's been a lack of progress for so many years in the bus and taxi industries that carry the bulk of the commuters in the country. So only new initiatives we've had over the years are the BRT systems that really service a very limited portion or percentage of the commuters traveling South Africa, and then also Gautrain. The public transport system's backbone of this country, despite government's declaration of rail being the backbone, is really an informal, unregulated mode of transport with about 80% of the commuter trips taking place by this industry. And we've seen with what's going on in PRASA, it's virtually non-existent at this point in time as far as passenger trips are concerned. Public transport in the country is in dire straits, with the commuting public suffering the consequences on a daily basis. This is evidenced by findings of the latest House of Travel survey as well as operators themselves. The same conclusions are also to be found in the Competition Commission's report on public transport that was released late last year and discussed in final format this year. It appears as if we are shying away from the critical analysis of introspection of the reasons why the current policy is not being implemented, but yet we depend on the very same institutional structures and systems to implement these far-reaching proposals. What will change if we don't have specific remedial actions in the new proposed policy to address these shortcomings? And this is really, I think, at the heart of the issue. We've not been successful because those institutional structures, that middle layer, have not been performing as they should have been performing. What is going to change? What are we going to do from this policy point of view to make that change so we can implement the policy, the existing one as well as the new one that's being developed? So radical proposals made for public transport reform, both from a subsidy and ownership point of view, as well as from a fare system reform point of view. Radical proposals also being made for user-side subsidy that will be unparalleled and untested anywhere in the world. This is dangerous if implemented without thinking through the consequences and understanding the full implications of such type of subsidies. And the question one has in one's mind, has any thought been given about the potential impact of user-side subsidies on existing formal and informal modes of transport, the intended and the unintended potential impacts? Have we thought through this from a policy point of view? Have we looked at international experiences around this? Where are they? That we can study them, go there and have a look. It's imperative that these policy proposals be discussed in detail as it concerns major structural reforms with serious financial implications, not only for the operators, but also for the fiscus. It's therefore also imperative that the proposals be tested in demonstration projects projects. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, so that the full financial and operating implications for the industry at large can be modeled and projected forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Yes, certainly, certainly uncertainty has been with us for a while, and today's program is designed to somewhat create a room for dialogue and engagement to avoid it, but you've given us critical insight in the deeper dive of policy uncertainty there. Key takeaways, I think, also to talk to the forward space is that it speaks to critical intergovernmental as well as the tiered governmental alignment. And nothing has been more of a setback and or frustrating, depending who you speak to, over the last year to try and engage government through the various spheres at national level, from an intergovernmental and interdepartmental level, and then cascading through down through province, municipality, and district level. There's a misalignment of note, and a new policy would have to certainly be set up in a way that there should be fluidity at all levels. The environment's also been characterized by litigation, which almost becomes an easy way to deal with issues. And I think when we explore the policy going forward, we need to be able to engage in a way that says avoid litigious processes, think it through, engage fully, and avoid some of the lessons learned on a negative scale in the past. Thank you very much, Jackie. Okay, folks, we have, I can tell you that we have a lot of people sitting in groups in the various provinces, which is encouraging because people have got together to be COVID compliant, but still take in the webinar and the presentation. So we've now set the scene and stimulated your thought process. Ahead of it, I think with your invites, you should have got the invite with some links, and I hope you all have accessed and looked at the videos that were part of that main invitation. It's now time for the main course, so to speak, which will be a panel presentation on the draft discussion document for public transport subsidy policy. The panel team comprising Mr. Lesiba Manamela, Chief Director at the NDOT, Dr. Mateta Mokanyama, who is the Competence Area Manager for Transport Systems and Operations at the CSIR, and Ms. Rihanna Musaji, who is the founder of the Barefoot Facilitator and part of the consultancy that's dealing with the NDOT consulting to them. Some brief bios on our speakers. Dr. Mateta Mokanyama leads the multidisciplinary transport systems and operations area at the CSIR. He has professional interest in the development of methods and models for the sustainable provision of transport infrastructure and mobility services, including institutional capacity building. Rihanna Musaji from the Barefoot Facilitator leads stakeholder engagement at the Future of Transport. She holds a BA degree in education. She was the MMC for Transport in the city of Johannesburg and is a member at the Institute for Transport Development and Policy, and was featured by the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative in the inaugural Remarkable Women in Transport series. So to our panel and to the National Department of Transport, thank you again for allowing SABOA and the Transport Forum to host this important engagement. Thank you also for the important work you're undertaking in this space. And we hope that you are ready for some robust engagement and discussions of the policy document, which is well supported in principle for the change from our stakeholders. Rihanna, I'm told that the panel presentation will be facilitated by yourself, so over to you.
Thanks.
Welcome,
thanks,
and
Basil.
thanks.
Thanks, Harry, and thanks for affording both the Department of Transport and Future of Transport Consulting the platform through the Transport Forum. It's been interesting because I think Prof. Walters has already kind of raised a number of issues, but maybe before we get into answering some of the challenges that have been put by Prof to some of the proposals, I just want to check, there are about 130 people on the call, and as Basil has indicated, there were some links that were sent out with the invitation. The links had the draft discussion document. They also had 2 videos. So Harry, if we can just bring up a poll. So colleagues, we're going to ask you just to participate very quickly so that we can decide how to take the session forward, also noting that we are running slightly behind the schedule that was indicated. So if you could just go to polls and participate in the poll on whether you've watched the video on building blocks or the deep dive. There were 2 videos, so if you could just indicate whether you've watched those videos with a yes or a no accordingly. We're not going to throw you out if you haven't watched the videos, so please just relax if you haven't had the chance to watch them. Tulani, there is a link, I think, that is available. I see you asking about the draft discussion document. I'm sure it is available on the website, and we can also make the link available to attendees. So colleagues, if we could ask you just to participate in the poll, and then that will give us a sense of how we move it forward. Harry, if you're just able
still
to
voting,
share.
let's give them a few seconds.
Whilst we're waiting, I just kind of use the voting time to also say that the team at Future of Transport is led by Darko Skripinsic, who is the CEO of the company. We also have on the team Dr. Jonathan Bloom, who's a transport economist. You've heard Mateta's introduction, and then also Zain Randri, who is a legal expert in the transport fraternity in particular. So I want to assure you, Prof. Walters, that we have had many hours of debate, discussion, challenging each other, and in coming to some of what you see in the draft proposal. So certainly hasn't been a situation of us kind of just sitting around and putting some radical proposals to irritate people, and that there's a lot of balancing. And I think, okay, so almost 83% of people have not watched the second video, and almost 79%. So we're not going to kind of use both videos because of the limitation on time, but they both will be available to you. But just to say that the building blocks video is really kind of trying to set the context. And I think, Prof. Walters, it's really important that when we have the subsidy policy conversation, we're not having it as a democratic dispensation conversation. That in fact, our understanding of the evolution of the subsidy regime, integrally tied as it was to issues of apartheid spatial planning and a policy, unfortunately, of apartheid separate spatial development that continues to haunt all of us. And I guess the other thing I want to say, so Darko is suggesting, Darko, we won't have the time to play both videos. So I'm going to just say that the first video kind of gives the overall context for how the team have thought through this policy development process, but also just to say that it is not the responsibility of this policy to fix intergovernmental challenges. It would be way beyond the scope of this policy. And I think the challenges that are being outlined around government capacity are a collective challenge for everyone on this call and everyone not on this call. There are no magic wands to fix government capacity issues. And it's interesting that I think Mateta and the CSIR are working particularly hard on that pipeline. So I'm going to suggest then that we're going to play the second video. So maybe Harry, Fahima, just hold on 1 second. Harry and Basil, just to be guided by you based on the number of people who've not watched the videos, but I don't want to take up all of the time. I think, we've got Mateta here, we've got Mr. Manamela here, and we want to also leave time for discussion, but I'll be guided by yourselves as the hosts. Shall we just play only the second video, which is the deep dive, which really gets into the benchmarks. It doesn't give you the broad contextual thinking of the team, which the first video does.
I'm okay with that, Rihanna. I think it's pretty much hovering on the same percentages there, but I think one leads to the other, and you're going to end up ultimately at the deep dive anyway. So I'm comfortable if you. I'm leaving it to you. How's that for a throwback?
Okay.
If you believe there's merit and value, I think we've waited long enough for this discussion and engagement. In total, it's 6 and 12 minutes. So the Q&A will unfold, and we'll log questions as we're going along for you in preparation of that. But your call in terms of getting maximum impact.
Mateta, your view? Okay, I'm just going to unilaterally decide. Fahima, let's play just a deep dive, and colleagues, we will make the first video available to you so that you can watch it at your convenience. The previous video painted a picture of the problems and challenges we are trying to address with the formulation of a public transport subsidy policy. As we engage people from various spheres of life, we continue to hear sentiments that are either about a specific transport mode, for example, rail versus bus versus taxi, or about different spheres of government and who is best suited to administer subsidy, or about the fact that subsidies should be given directly to users. Having reviewed a range of international examples, there are a few common threads that have emerged. In most contexts, both in the developing and developed world, direct public transport subsidy applies exclusively to formalized public transport services. Given the critical role of the minibus taxi sector in the South African landscape, we need to be decisive about how to include this technology in the financed network. International experience is also conclusive that competitive tendering reduces operating costs. Whilst our legislation makes provision for negotiated contracts to enable and accelerate the public transport transformational objectives, the sooner we begin to create the conditions for competitive tendering, the better. International practices also demonstrate various innovative options and permutations within the competitive tendering regime that may be considered. Based mainly on the fundamentals of the net or gross-based contracts, which could include cost plus, or gross cost with incentives, or net cost, minimum subsidy, or net subsidy, all with varied levels of outcomes relating to a balance between operational efficiencies, service quality, and risk management. Having analyzed the historic and prevailing problems and challenges, looked at the current issues and trade-offs between the social, economic, and environmental dimensions, and learned from international experience, it is proposed that there be collective clarity on the foundational principles that underpin the public transport subsidy policy. These principles are: 1.
Subsidy must be implemented to facilitate the realization of a sustainable transport system. 2. Subsidy must support the correction of spatial imbalances and provide access to opportunity. 3. Subsidy must increase the affordability of services by low-income individuals and households. 4. Subsidy must support the capitalization of the public transport network at an appropriate rate to create responsive network capacity. 5. Subsidy will require responsive transport plans and the achievement of measurable outcomes. These principles are deliberately outcomes-based and intend to mainly focus public transport subsidies on achieving specific goals set by municipalities in their transport plans. The proposed subsidy model factors in mode-specific operational and financial efficiencies, expects public transport to be cost recovery-based, and differentiates urban and rural areas given the vastly different operating conditions. Whilst proposing both capital and operating subsidy, the latter will increasingly be administered using information technology. Transport subsidy must achieve specific sustainability goals with benchmarks. These goals are: Goal: minimize the input costs of public transport services. Benchmark: in urban areas, the cost of personnel costs as a proportion of operating costs to be limited to 25% for road-based modes and 40% for rail-based services. Goal: minimize impact to the environment. Benchmark: achieve a system-level maximum of 50 grams CO2 per passenger kilometer traveled for motorized transport. Goal: minimize trip length. Benchmark: maximum trip length of 40 kilometers one way for work trips, maximum of 10 kilometers for education trips. Goal: minimize motorized travel. Benchmark: maximum 2.5 trips per person per day without compromising basic needs. Goal: minimize crashes. Benchmark: towards zero fatalities. Goal: direct cost of transport to society as percentage of GDP. Benchmark: the direct costs of transport to society as a percentage of GDP should be less than 7%, ideally at 5%. Goal: reduce total travel time. Benchmark: travel time on public transport to be limited to 40 minutes for work trips, 20 minutes for education, and 1 hour for other trip purposes. Goal: minimize cost of service to the user. Benchmark: limit expenditure on transport to 10% of income for those who earn an income and 120 Rand per month to persons from poor households. Goal: minimum operating speed on public transport. Benchmark: a minimum operating speed on the approved public transport network of 40 kilometers per hour during peak. Goal: universal access. benchmark, at least 80% of special needs travelers should indicate that they are able to use public transport without difficulty. The transport plans will have to demonstrate how the public transport subsidy will be utilized to attain the above goals gradually over a planning period. The roles and responsibilities envisaged for realizing the possibility are drawn from existing national policy, particularly the White Paper on National Transport Policy. The subsidy policy requires maturity in intergovernmental relationships and requires the national department to focus on transport policy, strategy, and strategic transport planning. The Department of Transport must work with provinces and municipalities to capacitate provinces and municipalities to properly perform their land transport functions. Provinces would be responsible for the preparation of provincial transport plans, liaison with other government departments whose responsibility impacts transport, and supporting capacitation of municipalities where warranted. Municipalities will be expected to work closely with communities in developing responsive transport plans to implement built environment policies that support sustainable development and for contracting of transport services and monitoring such provision. Due to the fact that some of the provisions being proposed in the subsidy policy may require some time, there are also specific bridging actions which are proposed as implementation priorities. These include 1. Evaluating possible additional capital subsidy funding of the minibus taxi operators through increasing the budget for the scrapping allowance in the taxi recapitalization program on per application basis. 2. Evaluating appropriate technology solutions to introduce a cashless and automatic fare collection system for minibus taxis whilst appreciating the prevailing business model of the industry. 3. Preparing a competitive procurement process for the prevailing bus contracts in order to stabilize the services. 4. Providing subsidized connectivity of road-based services to rail services in order to strengthen the role of rail as the backbone of public transport. 5. The location of state-subsidized housing programs, including student accommodation, in the vicinity of rail stations. With these principles, goals, benchmarks, roles and responsibilities, and focused areas for implementation, South Africa could signal in a new era of transparency, certainty, human dignity, and accountability in how resources from the public purse are used to support the movement of people, whilst cognizant of the need to keep improving the transport system so it better supports the economy, allows people's social needs to be met, but also balancing those with the needs of the environment. Are you ready to be part of the public transport subsidy policy conversation?
Thanks, colleagues, for allowing us to screen that. I've noted a number of requests in the chat, and Fahima will post the links to both videos and the document into the chat. Maybe let's start off with a clarity question. And Mateta, I'm going to ask you to come in both for this question and some of the broad observations that Prof. Walters has succinctly shared with us before our presentation. There's a specific question on the target maximum cost of 120 Rand per month, whether that's per person or per household. But Mateta, I'm going to hand over to you. And then I think, Lisiba, you can also come in just in relation to some of the concerns around whether the fiscal environment is being taken into consideration as this policy is being developed in some of the conversations we've been having with National Treasury and other departments. So Mateta, over to you. And then colleagues, we will allow you to either raise your hand, as Harry has explained at the beginning, or to post your questions in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on those. Mateta, over to you.
Good morning, Rihanna, thanks, and colleagues, good morning. I disappeared because our mayor here has decided to cut off power. But then I think as a start, I would say, for a country that is currently spending 3.5% minimum, at least, of GDP on crashes, right? 3.5% on crashes, and less than 1%, about 0.8% of its budget or GDP, let me say, on public transport. We cannot say we cannot afford to do what we need to do. I think that it's a misnomer to say that we cannot afford. For a country that is spending a minimum of 3.5% of GDP on crashes, we cannot say that. But also, we're forecasting as a country about 500 billion deficit for road accident funds by 2023. Yet we spend about 37 billion, right, collectively on public transport, and yet we say that it is important and so forth. If you look at the National Development Plan, right, it says that we need to be spending about 10% of GDP on network industries and so forth, transport being one of them. We are a country that I believe has got misaligned, priorities, and we need to align them, realign them, and that's a leadership question. It's not even a technical; it's a leadership question. We need to align what we do to real priorities. So that we cannot afford. I just want to get that out. That we cannot afford this thing is not true, because we are able to afford other things that are not a priority at all. And the proposal, if you look at the document, is to say the state needs to increasingly get to funding public transport to the tune of 5% of GDP, right? Public transport, 5%. Currently, we're talking about 0.8, less than 1%. But then society at the moment spends, society as a whole, right, spends about 12 or so % on transport. We shouldn't be spending really more than about 7%. And that's one of the targets. If you've seen that when you finance for an outcome. You don't finance line items. I think one of the things that we need to get out of is thinking line items. There's a book called "Where is My Cheese?" Who moved my cheese? Let me say, who moved my cheese? We should write a book called "Who Moved My Budget Line?" Budget lines will move, and in the interest of society, not in the interest of specific players. It's not about specific modes of transport. It's about making sure that local government can be creative in what it does. You allow local government to be creative. So you specify outcomes and say, give me that. You give them space to produce outcomes. Now, the question of why certain things haven't been achieved I suppose it's a matter that can be discussed, in some other session. But part of it is, if you look at, where local government has been spending time, especially the cities, they've been experimenting a lot with, this implementation of, BRT programs. So planning took a backseat. I think we started very well in the early 2000s, putting some effort in, having plans. But, there was this, weight around, implement this, BRT programs, which were done, but we got stuck. I think the balance between planning and implementing specific projects, got out of balance, essentially. That got out of balance. So we need to rebalance that, because we can do it, because we have shown that we have been able to show that we can do it. So it's a matter of, bringing that back, capacity back. So very important is, the subsidy needs to finance an outcome, not just a public transport niche, but a transport network outcome. So, for example, one of the things you talked about, the 120 rand, that is per person. A lot is around per person, but then also a lot is about achieving, sustainable goals, specific outcomes. If you're talking, for example, 40 kilometers per hour speed, in some comments, it's saying, but that is too high. But when you look at the policy itself, and this, what is being suggested here is not a departure from the existing transport policy. It's actually a clarification, an add-on to what is being proposed there as policy. 40 kilometers per hour. You're saying in the original policy white paper, you cannot subsidize anything more than 40 kilometers. It's been there. And then you also say in some other provisions, trips shouldn't be more than an hour. Essentially, you are saying on average, you want to invest in something that targets about 40 kilometers per hour. So it is there. I mean, it's just implementation of what is there already. The carbon footprint targets, those are commitments that South Africa has made. So what are we saying about the commitments, the signatures that we have made? Are we saying that we do away with because history has behaved in a certain way? We increase capacity to implement. That's what we should do. We cannot just fold our arms, throw our arms in the air and say things have not worked in the past in certain ways, and therefore we'll continue with business as usual, and then say, where is my line item, and then cry for a line item. We cannot do that. So we need to be decisive in terms of increasing the capacity of local government to implement. And one of the suggestions, just to wrap up for now, is that if you read, it says that appropriately trained personnel is one of the lines there. Appropriately trained personnel will develop such plans in order to achieve desirable outcomes, right? In this regard, transport planning and management professionals across all spheres of government responsible for generation of transport plans will be required to have a minimum level of professional accreditation to be developed by the Department of Transport. So it's saying where you have problems with capacity, let's address it. Let's have an accreditation program so that there's quality control in the plans that are being developed. It's not just a random plan, copied and pasted, like it's been the norm. And so another thing is really about upholding, respecting the Constitution. If you look at some of the grant framework that has been there, it has been tying local government to only doing certain things, right? You cannot say local government, you are a planning authority, and then tell them how to plan. How then are you saying that you're a planning authority if you say you can only plan in this way? So you allow them to plan for outcomes. The role of national government is to create those policy targets, and then how that is done is really the ambit of local government. So the Constitution is very important there. Roles of I think the clip did touch on that. And then also lastly, this is not about just transport alone. There are other programs that the government has is busy with, human settlements. If you look at the automotive industry development plan, there's a target there that says local content needs to be increased from the baseline of about 37% to about 60%. Now, how are you going to achieve that if you are not investing in the local automotive industry? And now this is one, the financing of transport should be configured also in a way that helps other programs, state programs, so that it's not just one thing. There are many things that you can achieve, because you want to stretch the rent, achieve more with what you have, and we do have the resources. It's just that we have spent the resources all over the place. They're scattered all over the place. Thanks, man.
Mateta, before you go, I know you'll come back, but just there was a very specific issue that Prof. Walters had in his presentation around personnel costs, and the fact that the benchmarks as in the draft discussion document are completely unrealistic for the bus industry in the way the team have looked at it. Can you weigh in on that? And then also there are some questions from Susan Holmes in the chat, if you could look at those, Mateta, but if you could answer the thing on Prof. Walters, and then I'll go over to Lesiba and then come back to you.
Okay, on personnel costs, again, you want to minimize, reduce inefficiencies in the system, and there are examples of operators who have been able to keep operating costs, personnel costs as proportion of personnel costs to those levels, 25%. So it's not something that is not unachievable. It's something that is achievable. But very important is the statement or the key word, that is towards. So the clip actually talked about transitioning. So you want to show that you are moving towards a goal. If you look at a lot of the indicators that we have at the moment, they are regressing. We're regressing in many ways. So we need to be moving more and more towards that. What would it take you to get there? It's not impossible. I mean, we can model these things and get a sense of how to do it, how to get there. And like I said, there are examples of some operators who have been able to do that. Some, I mean, you look at public operators, they've got personnel costs at as high as 50, in some cases 55%. But then also the definition of operating costs. I think we need to be consistent, of course, across, the system, so that we compare apples with apples. But essentially, that target has been shown that it can be achieved.
Okay, Yolandi, I've noted your question in the chat in relation to the splits on transport mode. That's actually available in the first video. You'll see it there. But I'm going to invite in now the Chief Director of the Department of Transport, responsible for bus and taxi industry development at the National Department of Transport. Mr. Manamela, you've heard some of the views of Prof. Walters. We've also had the earlier presentation from Mr. Maluleke that really kind of gives an indication of quite a concerning economic outlook. This subsidy policy coming on the back of a global pandemic, what does this mean? And you've heard some of the criticisms that are being raised on, we're really good at getting things down on paper, really bad at actually doing them. So your view as the holder and custodian of this policy, the National Department of Transport.
Well, thanks, Rihanna. I think some of the issues that have been raised, Mateta touched on them, but I would like to focus on the issue on the fiscal, the constraints on the fiscals. We have already engaged at Treasury, but I think we all know that at the core of the subsidy policy is the issue around funding. What we have done now is to look at the consolidation of the existing pockets of funding that are there. How much do we have? Because as a starting point, we know in the short term, based on the economic outlook, there will be no major increases in the fiscals. But like in the closing statement that Mateta made, was that we do have some pocket of public transport funding. It's just that these pockets of funding are scattered all over. For example, when you look at if we look at the public transport operations grant and the public transport network grant, the one that looks at the establishment of the IPT and BRT and the normal subsidy for buses, you're talking around 13 billion. And the last time when we did the consolidation of different funding pots, we were looking at around 27 to 30 billion when you consider also money spent on municipal buses and so forth. So yes, we understand that in the short term there will be no major increases in the fiscals, but we are looking at the consolidation starting from what we have at the moment, because the subsidy policy now is going to look at, are we spending in the right places? Where do we subsidize? How should we subsidize? And where should we subsidize in terms of the beneficiaries who should be benefiting from the subsidy? So those are the key issues that we are factoring in. Of course, we're looking at all the modes now. I think Prof. Walters raised the issue of extending it to the taxis. As we all know, the subsidy goes to the users. The overall picture is that the policy should be addressing those key issues in terms of who should be benefiting directly, and then how should we be subsidizing in which areas. See the comments coming in from the disabled, but even in terms of rural versus urban, should we proceed with the way the IPTNs are being rolled out currently, or should we consolidate and try to have a public transport funding, a public transport fund established to look at both capital and operations? So yes, around the fiscals, we are engaging Treasury, but we are going to start with what we have now and look at what would be the future requirements in terms of the funding aspect of the whole policy.
Okay.
I think for now, I just wanted
I'm going to ask you to hold it there. I'm going to ask you to hold it there just so that we can allow some of the views that are coming through the chat as well as some hands. So I see someone, I'm assuming that it's a team of people there. You're coming up as Neuron Group with a raised hand. But Mateta, as I invite that person in, you might also want to get ready to respond to the question that's being raised by Helen, which is this idea of the policy indicating that vehicles should be owned by the state. But let's take the hand that is the Neuron Group, and let's take that question. Please unmute yourself and introduce.
Good morning, Basil and the team. This question is to you, Rihanna. You've indicated that this draft policy has been widely projected to the community. Is that true? And if so, I'm based in KZN. I have not heard of this. And can you explain which areas has this been canvassed? And my second question is to the doctor and anyone from the department. Do you honestly believe that the municipality could expedite this subsidy fairly, transparently, and honestly? Because this is one area, it's been proven through and through again, they have not expedited it. So any subsidies managed by the municipality, there's always a questionable, it's always questionable. So I'm just concerned, have we got the capacity, and how would you, if you can give us a brief, how you would handle that aspect of it, should you not get in private sector involvement in it? Thank you. And I have a question for Prof, but that will be later. I think he's still on the panel. Thank you, Basil.
Okay, I'm noting Susan and then Gordon. We'll take that round and then have some responses. Also noting that we have about 15 minutes left for the discussion. Susan?
I'm also, Rihanna, just collating some of the general comments, and I'll kind of categorize something for you at the end after the take off the hands, so that we covered everybody there as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Basil.
Rihanna,
Susan?
thank you very much. My query was whether micro transporters who provide first mile transport on rural and township terrain to the disabled and elderly, whether they are being considered as a formal part of the public network, the public transport network. Following on from that, if so, how is payment to these service providers envisioned during the universal fare card, using the fare card? And then will specially identifiable fare cards be made available to disabled and elderly for taxi drivers to identify them so that they know to stop for these commuters to facilitate reaching the 80% target? And will additional funds be made available on fare cards for people to pay the fares of the wheelchairs being transported by wheelchair users? And how will drivers be incentivized to take the extra time required to collect disabled commuters?
Thanks, Susan. Gordon?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. I think if we just step back a little bit, I think the issue, we often speak of transport in isolation, and what is coming through here is that it's the need to access opportunity affordably and sustainably is the critical departure point. And that really has come through very well, I think, in the goals that were set out. But there's a massive piece missing for me in this conversation around public transport. And if we look around the world, many, many countries see cycling as an integral part of a public transport system, and subsidize cycling as the first mile, last mile, or even the total journey in its own right. Now, one of the goals was to reduce scholar transport distances to 10 kilometers. The Netherlands is just looking to increase its cycling distances to 10 kilometers. So suddenly we're sitting looking at what is happening worldwide and looking at a specific aspect of a very, very highly subsidized part of our transport system, possibly fitting within a new grouping. My suggestion and question is, should cycling, particularly a non-motorized transport access in general, not be considered part of the public transport system and therefore qualify for subsidies at some level, as is done in many, many countries around the world? It also speaks directly to the climate change and mitigation, adaptation and mitigation things as espoused in the NDC at the moment, the updated NDC, which is the nationally determined contribution in terms of climate change. Thanks.
Okay, Landiwe, I am seeing your hand, but I'm just going to allow Mateta to respond. Colleagues, let me just respond to the issue that was raised about, of course, one can never say we've done sufficiently wide consultation. It's especially with a policy as sensitive as this one, but certainly with the challenges of COVID and other things, we've really tried our best, and this particular session is part of our stakeholder engagement. As the policy proceeds through the departmental cycles, then of course the formal community consultation processes will also kick off, but I think we've been really keen to engage as many possible directly affected stakeholders as we can. That doesn't mean that we've reached everyone who needs to be reached. But Mateta, let me hand over to you and Lesiba then to deal with some of the questions that have come through.
All right, thanks, Rana. The document, I think is good. It would be good if colleagues would go through it, and because a lot is answered there. But okay, to answer the question on the capital subsidy ownership of vehicles, there's a reason for that. If you are going to say, let's open the market access, for access by small, operators. They say, we can't raise money to do this. We cannot raise, capital to access these contracts. And what that means is that, only certain kind of players can play a role in this, services. But again, the definition of a service, it goes back to the definition of a service again. Service is about, it's not about necessarily, the infrastructure. You want to own the infrastructure. You want to reduce the barriers, let me say, the barriers to entry, but also the barriers to perform. And only have service providers, providing a service. Currently, government actually pays for, in the case of these, contracts, bus contracts, in the case of buses, government actually pays for these things. It pays for the vehicles. It's just that after the contract, the vehicle gets to be owned by whoever was operating. But also government can leverage using its own muscle to make sure that the automotive industry is resuscitated in the country. If you're going to move from that 37% local content to 60%, you've got to do something quite drastic. And so the financing of that doesn't have to come from the Department of Transport alone. The idea is that you want to move funding. I mean, previously the Department of Trade and Industry and now Competition has been focusing a lot more on private vehicle industry. Here's an opportunity to say, let's incentivize local production, but in support of sustainable mobility. Let's support local production. From a public transport, mass transport perspective, it's an opportunity, and so there's an opportunity that we need to exploit, going forward. But definitely, I mean, the state does finance these vehicles, but to reduce barrier entries, you may want to consider, having that arrangement. There are practices like that elsewhere in the world, which have been successful to some extent. They are, of course, they cost quite a bit of money. But again, how do you model? How do you account for a quality of life? I think the model that we use, the parameters that we use become very important. Because it's really the perspective, the boundary, the envelope that you use to measure, success of policy. So you can look at it narrowly in terms of your system boundaries, but you need to increase your system boundaries to be able to evaluate the success of policy in this case. So the system boundaries are really the transport system. It is not a bus network. It is not a taxi network. It is the transport system. And one of the colleagues raised it earlier about the cycling. Cycling can be an intervention to achieve an outcome. It's not excluded. It's not excluded at all. You have benchmark to say when you plan, when you implement, move towards this kind of outcomes, numbers. It's not about do bus, do taxi. It's about the performance of the network. Crashes, the same thing with crashes. If you're saying you are moving towards that number, 0 fatalities, that means that you need to develop finance and network that is able to give you that outcome. It's not about a bus, it's not about a taxi. It's about really the system, the network that you have. So will local government be able to pull this off? I mean, we have to create capacity in local government to be able to do this. If we don't, then South Africa goes to the dustbin. So we absolutely have no choice but to address capacity challenges in local government, and there are ways to do that. We started off very well, I think, as a country in the early 2000s, but we lost momentum to some extent, and it's about rebuilding rebuilding that capacity. And part of financing the policy is about financing capacity to implement, capacity to plan, as well, capacity to monitor, feedback systems, capacity to innovate, as well, because you cannot, keep doing the same thing. There's a lot to achieve an outcome. There's no one way of doing it. You want to create space, multiple ways of getting to a specific outcome. And you want to say local government must be a space where you can innovate going forward.
Mateta, I'm going to ask you to just hold it there. So Basil, just to check with you, we've got 4 minutes left for this session. I'm noting a couple of hands from Shona and Lizelle. So if you could please guide me as to how you want us to manage time.
That's a framework, Rihanna. So as long as you and the panel are available, I think let's entertain them, and we'll take it. I'll manage the process going forward from here. I think we've got them the last rounds.
Okay.
But yeah,
so
don't be bound by the couple of minutes. Let's just do a proper engagement here.
Okay, perfect. One can never have enough time for the complexity that is this policy and engagement. Yes. Let's take hands. I previously noted, I think it was Lindiwa, and then Shona and Lizelle.
And then, correct. Yeah.
Okay, let's go with Shona. I see the hand that was up earlier might have been about the links. So Shona, let's take you, and then Lizelle.
Thank you. I would just like to talk about the challenges we're experiencing on the ground with parents and people with disabilities. Not just physical disabilities with wheelchairs, but the stigma and bias linked to drivers stopping and being willing to actually load passengers or assist passengers into vehicles. Given that South Africa has ratified the UN Convention and that people with disabilities are part of the policy of access to work and being included into the economic drivers of this country, how are we intending to shift the bias and stigma linked to this community, which is large? We're talking about 8 million citizens in South Africa with disabilities and their family members. How do we incentivize drivers and educate and upskill them to sufficiently and confidently include people with disabilities into the system that they manage? Thank you.
Thanks, Shona. Lizelle?
Rihanna, it's Franco from Patco. How are you?
Hi, Franco. Long time.
Long time, yes. I hope you're well.
I didn't know you changed. I didn't know since the last time we met, Franco, that you became Lizelle.
Yes, I've become transgender now. So
Over to you, Franco.
My point is directed to Dr. Mukunyana with regards to the automotive industry and to what do they call it, capacitors, or whatever you want to call it, the automotive industry. The fact of the matter is that many companies have in fact invested large sums of money into bus production plants in South Africa. And these plants are on the verge of collapse purely because of the government policy and the slowness of government dealing with the current policies to give long-term contracts to bus operators in order to facilitate them to recapitalize their fleets and thereby creating hundreds, if not thousands of jobs in the automotive sector to support the public transport system. So it seems to me that government is not practicing what they preach, specifically in this regard, because we can be rest assured that probably 2 or 3 of those plants, if these things don't change very soon, will probably be closed and be lost. And therefore, what will also happen is that the supposed local content achievements that the DTI would like to achieve will also disappear. But just to make a correction there also, at this present point in time, some of these bus plants that are manufacturing here, in fact, have a much higher local content than 60%. They're sitting on approximately 80 to 85% local content, which needs to be acknowledged, by the department. And I think they must get their act together and start sorting out these contracts so we can activate job creation and improve the sector. That's my comment.
Thanks, Franco. Mateta, as I hand back to you and Lisiba for final comments, just please note in the chat a comment by Helen, which I think was seconded by Vui, in relation to, as you propose an increase on the scrapping allowance, is this more about subsidizing transaction capital than the taxi industry directly? So Mateta, I'm going to hand over to you, and then from you to Lisiba. And then I think I'll hand back to Basil.
Yes, quick answers, mindful of time. I think there's an economy, I believe, that is benefiting or beneficiaries of non-implementation. There are vested interest in the value chain. And lack of implementation is benefiting, certain players. That's my personal view. So if we want to really, overcome certain things, we need to deal with this vested interest and overcome, going forward. So the issue of local content, buses, and so forth. Yes, I think it's a point. I think it's just, advice to government to say, walk the talk. And it's really about implementation. There are these things that are being said, but, implementation is not taking place. And hence my comment around, there are certain vested interests. I mean, even the legal fraternity is complicit in this, to say, we just want to create this, these blockages, and it's just a lot of friction for things to move forward because of vested interest. So if we don't deal with them, especially, I mean, even at industry level, at some stage we need to balance, needs, societal needs with, individual, sector-specific needs, and I suppose it's hard to do. But for progress, it will require that that to happen. Otherwise, we get stuck in a certain cycle. So it is advised, and I think it's noted that local content in some of the plans that are there is relatively higher. But we're talking about the overall automotive industry is still relatively low. So there's really room for improvement there. The issue of disabilities. Disabilities, I think, let's not mystify this thing. Anyone tomorrow, today, anyone can become disabled. People go blind. People who've been, have perfect, sight. Months later they go blind. So everyone can be in that, state. So we need to plan with specific outcomes. One of the targets there is to say whatever you plan for, it needs to be assessed by the actual user. So one of the targets is at least 80% of special needs travelers should indicate that that they are able to use public transport without difficulty. Now, it's a perception, and if I don't feel that I can do it, then improve it. Improve how you implement, plan, and of course implement and finance that outcome. Again, it's an outcome. How you do it is really open for innovation. Yes, let me stop.
Mateta, can you just deal with the issue about the recap allowance and the transaction, we're subsidizing transaction capital rather than the industry? It's a comment in the chat.
Well, it's a view. It's a view. Government policy is there. It says that we will improve safety in public transport. But I suppose the implementation, the how part, is something else. I mean, there's a view that this is captured by a certain group, but the implementation of it, how you specify the guideline around who's the supplier, who's the financier of the vehicles, is something that the financial sector needs to address going forward. So there's broader issues of transformation in the financial sector. APSA was here. How are you transforming the banking industry as a whole? So it's beyond, I think, the issues of subsidy necessarily. It's about the financial sector reforms, I think.
Mr. Manamela, over to you for 3 minutes. I know that there's still lots of questions in the chat around COVID, whether the policy has taken those things into consideration, scholar transport, but unfortunately we're going to have to be respectful of people's time. So Mr. Manamela, 3 minutes, over to you.
No, thanks, Rena. I think one would just say in conclusion that when you look at the policy, there are those radical changes that are being proposed in the policy. But when you read it at the end, it tried to break it down into short term, medium term, and long term, taking into cognizance that some of these radical proposals will take time to implement because it becomes a policy shift. Now, the discussions now should be around testing whether those proposals, those radical proposals that are to bring in terms of subsidization are feasible, but it will take time to implement. And then based on the comment from Franco and Prof to say, in the short term, the policy also tried to bring about proposals that can be implemented to stabilize the public transport environment. So maybe when we discuss, we should always know the intention that ultimately the intention is to bring up those changes to the public transport environment in the long term, so that public transport, I saw there was a comment in terms of encouraging a shift from private to public transport ultimately. But what we do in the short term should not lock us into inefficiencies. I think when we talk about whether you want to activate existing bus contracts, yes, we can do that, but it should be, although we can do it in the short term, it should be within the context of the long-term plan so that it doesn't perpetuate inefficiencies forever. And so that balance, I think, in the discussions going forward is needed, but we would realize that yes, the policy is proposing very radical shift from a policy level, and then we can continue discussing whether some of those, whether it's operational or otherwise, those proposals of policy shift are feasible. We test them and make sure that they are implemented. So we will welcome the discussions going forward with that in mind. I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Lesiba. Basil, with that, it's 5 to 12, and thank you for this opportunity and platform, and back to you.
Thanks. Thanks to the panel. Thanks, Rihanna. Thanks, Lesiba and Dr. Mokanya. Mariana, before I kind of go into a summation and a closure, can you just briefly, and I'm not sure who on the panel would be able to, just roadmap the process regarding the policy vis-a-vis consultation, engagement, drafts, and submissions, just so as I can align it and everybody on the, we have stakeholders representing different constituencies. I'll talk to collation and harmonizing submissions to yourselves, but if you can just give us an idea of what happens in the process flow going forward before I sum up. Thanks.
Darko, do you want to come in on this one? Okay, I'm not sure if Darko, yeah.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks, Basil. Okay, the timeline for the closure or completion of the particular assignment and hopefully bringing the policy document to cabinet is the end of the year. So we are now in the process, and as Diana mentioned, this particular event is part of the process of engaging stakeholders as far as possible. There has been other attempts through Google Drive to reach out. Obviously, there are certain targeting of certain key stakeholders, especially from the government sector. But anybody can really reach out and request, either provide the comments and inputs, or basically request further the engagements with the team. Whether and how and when these engagements will take place is something that team will take into consideration. So everybody is welcome. This is one of the platforms. This Transport Forum is one of the platforms that members of the forum can use to reach out to the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Darko. Yeah, so folks, I think we're coming to the tail end of the process, and by all manner of means, in terms of wrapping up, I think you've got some kind of answer in some kind of format. The $1 million question was always going to be on everybody's lips, and I'm surprised nobody asked it directly. Where will the money come from? But I think Dr. Mateta and Lesiba said, in terms of channeling and redirecting and prioritizing and consolidating, we are heading to a new policy. To the panel, I think take the skepticism and some of the criticisms about policies, because I think inherently we've had so many policies, there's always a bit of skepticism around another policy or another draft policy. But I think we're walking this walk together, and I think all stakeholders present today have indicated willingness. Lizelle, Franco, I'm not sure if that's a new end or you wanted to say something before I wrap up.
Basil, yes, it's a new hand, and it's myself again. Sorry.
So, in other words, a new hand in the same dress or the same glove. Go right ahead.
Something like that, you know. And I think just a comment in terms of the timelines and in terms of consultation that should take place in order for a particular policy of this nature to be presented to Cabinet by the end of the year. I really think that's very, very, very optimistic, given the very limited consultation that has taken place and what we have seen by some of the questions that have come through today. So from a SABOA point of view, I think as one of the members, I think it's important that there are many, many more engagements with let me say, the consultants in terms of this policy, as well as the Department of Transport, because to have such a far-reaching, let me say, change or shift in policy to try and shift this thing in such an aggressive way, especially when the multi-million-dollar question you asked is where the fund's going to come from. That's the biggest challenge, but there's a lot more consultation that needs to take place. And, you know, obviously we realize that with COVID-19, everything has been delayed and things like that. So that needs to be taken into cognizance in terms of how we deal with this matter, this very important and strategic issue going forward, other than being only a sensitive issue, because it is, but it has far-reaching implications for many, many different, I would say, spheres of government, not only just transport. It's Treasury, it's Department of Trade and Industry, and all sorts of other areas. That was the comment I just wanted to make.
Thanks, Franco. You touched and alluded to some of my wrap up, but yeah, absolutely well put. This is by no means the one and only discussion. And from our initial engagements with the panel, I think there's a willingness to collaborate on this process and ensure as inclusive a process. So in wrapping up, everybody, thanks to all the attendees and all of the participants and the panelists. As I indicated and Franco said right now, it's a policy discussion that affects public transport integration at various sectors. So, but it also affects and influences a broader stakeholder base. So your timelines are going to be seriously challenged if I automatically think of the layers of labor, business, community, transport representative community organizations. But I think there's a role to play from SABOA. Certainly, I think we've set a good base for constructive dialogue, and we'll schedule perhaps 1 to 3 more sessions towards the tail end, leading up to a final submission. But having said that, I just want to tell everybody, if you do have comments and you want it included, irrespective of constituency, please submit comments for collation if you choose to SABOA at SABOA, and we'll then harness that and put it into relevant document format for the panel and the team. And then for giving up your time today, everybody, well done, thanks, and for your interaction, and to the consultancy, the National Department, and the panel, thank you again for allowing us to launch this platform of dialogue. And a special word of thanks to our sponsors today, our associate and strategic partner, Liability, Underwriting Managers, and Indwera Services for sponsoring and co-hosting. And as always, Harry van Eystien and Transport Forum. I think you've enabled SABOA to take a new step in a new digital realm that allows all our members to access us in a much easier way, given the COVID conditions. We had upwards of 230 odd registered, and excluding YouTube attendees, and people have also been present in groups. I can say we've literally had 6 out of the 9 provinces covered today in terms of geographics and accessing this. So I'm looking forward to everybody's input. Thank you, everybody. Take care and be safe.
Thank you, Basil, from the Transport Forum. Thank you for collaborating. It's This video will also be uploaded to the Sabawa's YouTube playlist. And yeah, looking forward to being hosted by Sabawa again. Thank you very much for your support.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you. Goodbye.